Welcome. Today, we're diving deep into something that's a fundamental part of being human, but also one of the most dangerous, group conflict. We're going to unpack the hidden psychological rules that explain why we form groups in the first place, why we're willing to defend them so fiercely, and, most importantly, how we can all get better at navigating the friction that always seems to pop up.
You've seen this, right? It's one of the weirdest things about us. People will get into huge arguments over stuff that seems, well, trivial. Sports fans coming to blows over a team, or office departments that basically turn into warring factions. The truth is, humans are often willing to sacrifice everything for their group. And here's the kicker. This isn't a glitch in our programming. It's a core feature. To really get a handle on conflict, you have to understand that our deep-seated need to belong is often a much stronger driver than our own individual will to survive. It's a force that can lead to incredible achievements, but also to our most tragic moments. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 5 parts. First, we'll look at the hidden code that creates that us versus them feeling. Then we'll step inside the in-group to see what makes it tick. After that, we'll get into the darker side of things, how our brains start to diminish people outside our circle. From there, we'll actually map out the predictable steps that lead to hostility, and we'll finish up with a real practical strategy you can use to navigate this crazy social world of ours.
So let's start at the beginning with the foundational code. Now, this is so important to get. Forming groups isn't really a conscious choice we make. It's an evolutionary command. Think about it. Our ancient ancestors, out on the savannah, they were pretty vulnerable by themselves. Alone, your lunch. But together, in a group, you can hunt, you can defend your territory, you can raise your kids. Sticking together wasn't just a nice idea, it was a biological necessity. And that deep, ancient instinct is still hardwired into our brains today.
And this whole system is basically governed by 2 core laws that work together. Law number 1 is that group formation instinct we just talked about, that automatic biological pull to team up, but that's only half the story. The second law is that as soon as a group forms, it instantly starts creating its own special set of internal rules, its own little culture. We call these group norms. And these norms are the social glue that holds the whole thing together, and they also define who's in and who's out.
You know, what's really fascinating is how we go from being just an individual to a full-blown, dedicated group member. It seems to happen in 3 clear phases. So imagine you start a new job. At first, you might find yourself unconsciously using the same inside jokes or slang as your new coworkers. That's conformity. Then, after a while, you start to feel real pride in working there. You wear the company t-shirt, you start to see the job as part of who you are. That's your social identity kicking in. And finally, you might feel this unspoken pressure to stay late just because everyone else is. That's peer pressure. That's the group making sure you stick to the rules.
And this whole process creates this really rigid, black and white social world inside our heads. The source material uses the Japanese terms naishudan and gaishudan, which are perfect for this. The naishudan is your in-group. It's us. And the unity here isn't just about liking each other. It's enforced by the group to make sure you all act as one. And then there's everybody else. They fall into the gaishudan, the out-group, them. It's such a simple, powerful division, but this mental line in the sand is the seed for all kinds of conflict.
Okay, let's keep building on that. So for this next part, we're going to go inside the naishudan, the in-group. We're going to look at the specific psychological tools that build such a strong identity, the ones that literally transform a bunch of separate I's into a powerful, unified we.
So what is it that actually holds a group together? Well, it turns out there are 2 main forces at work. The first is what we call interpersonal cohesion. This is the emotional stuff. It's based on real friendship, actually liking the people you're with. The second type is task-achieving cohesion, and this is much more practical or utilitarian. This is all about how the group helps you get something done, like a project team at work, where the main goal is to finish the task. A group can be held together by one of these forces or even both. Now, as these forces get stronger, something really fundamental starts to change inside our heads. We begin to adopt what's known as a social identity. This is the point where your sense of self-worth isn't just about who you are as an individual anymore. It starts getting tied up in the groups you belong to, your city, your school, your company. The I doesn't just join a group. It slowly starts to get replaced by a collective we.
And if you take that to its absolute extreme, you get a state called identity fusion. This is where the line between you and the group completely disappears. The self just dissolves into the collective. And when that happens, an attack on your group, say a criticism of your company or an insult to your favorite team, it doesn't just feel like words anymore. Your brain literally processes it as a direct, physical, and personal attack on you.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. You see this play out everywhere, from the everyday to the life or death. It's the psychological engine behind the pure rage a fan feels when their team gets insulted. It's what drives gang members into deadly fights to protect their group's reputation. It's what allows a soldier to sacrifice their own life for the person next to them. And it's what makes a parent instinctively put their family's survival above their own. In every single one of these cases, the self has fused with the group.
So now we have to talk about the inevitable flip side of building a strong us. The very same mental tricks that create that amazing in-group bond also create a huge gap with the out-group. This section is all about how we mentally devalue and sometimes even dehumanize them.
As soon as that we is solid, a mental shortcut called in-group bias just kicks in automatically. This is our natural tendency to see our own group as being just better and to give its members special treatment. You see it all the time. In the workplace, this bias can sneak into hiring decisions. Maybe you choose someone from your old university over a more qualified candidate. Or you see it in performance reviews, where you think your own team's project was genius, but you apply super critical standards to everyone else's.
So you have to wonder, right? What does it actually take to trigger this kind of bias? Do you need like a long history of conflict between two groups? Deep cultural differences? A real fight over resources? I mean, how much meaning does a group even need to have before we start playing favorites?
Well, the answer from the famous minimal group experiment is just wild. It takes almost nothing. Researchers brought in a bunch of complete strangers and divided them into groups based on something totally meaningless, like which of two paintings they preferred. These people never met, they didn't even know who was in their group. And yet, when they were asked to anonymously hand out money, they consistently gave more to people in their own pointless painting preference group. The takeaway here is huge. Our brains are just wired to create and favor an us the second any line gets drawn, no matter how random it is.
But why do we do this? Is it just that we're nice people? Well, a theory called bounded generalized reciprocity suggests it's actually way more strategic. The idea is that our favoritism is kind of like a calculated social investment. By being good to people in our in-group, we're building up a good reputation. And that good reputation secures our spot in the group and makes it more likely they'll help us out later. It's like a social insurance policy. But here's the catch. It only pays out to members of our own club.
So as we're building up our own group, we're simultaneously tearing down the other one. And we do this with a mental shortcut called the out-group homogeneity bias. Here's how it works. We see our own group, the good us, as being full of unique, complex, interesting, and moral individuals. But we see the out-group, the bad them, as a single uniform block. They just become those people. All the same, all interchangeable, and often we see them as a threat. This is such a critical mental move because it's a lot easier to be hostile toward a faceless monolith than it is toward a group of actual, distinct human beings.
Okay, so we've looked at all the building blocks now. That instinct to form groups, the way our identities can fuse together, and the mental biases that divide us from them. In this section, we're going to put all those pieces together. We're going to look at a clear, predictable cycle that shows how just belonging to a group can escalate all the way to open conflict.
This right here lays out the whole psychological roadmap. It's like a set of dominoes. It all starts with a simple social identity. That leads to group cohesion. Then, naturally, in-group bias and the need for reputation management kick in. In more serious cases, that deepens into full-on identity fusion, which then triggers the out-group homogeneity bias, where we start to dehumanize the other side. You can see how each step just logically flows into the next, basically priming the pump for that final explosive stage, actual conflict, prejudice, and discrimination.
But here's the thing. This whole setup can just exist in our heads as a kind of dormant prejudice. Moving from stage 6, seeing the other group as all the same, to stage 7, which is open hostility, well, that's not automatic. It needs one final push. It needs a specific set of real-world conditions to actually light the fuse.
And this is an absolutely key insight. According to something called realistic conflict theory, prejudice is most likely to explode into real conflict when 3 specific conditions are met. First, the groups are on equal footing. They're about the same size and strength. Second, they're in a shared context, meaning they operate in the same space. And third, and this is the critical ingredient, they face a zero-sum competition. This is a situation where they believe that for one group to win, the other group has to lose. When you get those 3 things together, the psychological time bomb we've just built finally goes off.
So, we've spent all this time diagnosing the problem, tracing the deep psychological roots of conflict, which leads to the big question: what do we do about it? In this last section, we're shifting from theory to practice. We're going to focus on a personal mindset, a strategy for actually navigating this incredibly complex social maze.
Let's start with a classic experiment that actually offers some hope. It's called the Robber's Cave experiment. Researchers took 22 totally normal boys, divided them into two groups at a summer camp, and within just 3 weeks, they had manufactured intense hatred between them. Now, that finding is scary, but the lesson is incredibly powerful. It proves that these super strong group identities are often just artificial things we build. And if they can be built that quickly out of nothing, it means they can also be weakened or even dismantled. So the first step is just to recognize how artificial these dividing lines really are.
So, what's the strategy for you as an individual when you're stuck in the middle of a group conflict? The first, and honestly the most powerful thing you can do, is to shift your mindset from being a participant to being a calm observer. This means you have to consciously take a step back from all the rising emotions, the anger, the fear, the feeling of being right, and just try to see the underlying dynamics for what they are. You become a scientist studying a phenomenon, even while you're standing in the middle of it.
Now listen, this is a really important point. Being an observer doesn't mean you can just stand on the sidelines and do nothing. Sometimes for your own social survival or to keep your job, you might have to outwardly go along with your group. You might have to play the part. The absolute key is to do that without letting your inner self get completely swallowed up by the group's emotions. You have to protect your own core values and your inner calm, even if you have to put on a show on the outside.
And really, that brings us to the final rule for navigating our tribal world. It's a discipline. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing these powerful psychological forces at play, both in yourself and in other people. Be an observer. Play along when you have to, but never, ever lose that inner calm or who you truly are to the heat of the moment. That is the key, not just to surviving group conflict, but to navigating it successfully. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.